Hey guys, what's up? It is Ripe again, back with more revenge stories. If you haven't already, please don't forget to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/ripeyoutube for exclusive Reddit content. Without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. And the first one is titled, I just wanted the truck moved. I worked as a security guard downtown in a large Canadian city. This story starts when I got a phone call from one of the other guards working. He found a contractor had parked and left a truck in a loading dock bay and was inquiring if I knew anything about it. The site I worked at had two buildings, over 60 floors between them, and that shared a loading dock with only 3 spaces. Occasionally, on an expected slower day, contractors could ask us to leave a vehicle there if they were doing a quick job, but it was infrequent as the loading dock was really busy. Around this time, there was a company who had just rented 2 or 3 floors, and there was a massive remodel going on there. People were in and out constantly, and the job was going to run for a few months. This made the loading dock base busy enough that we were not letting anyone park there, just unload. I had been there that day and no one had asked permission to park and nothing had been passed on from other guards or property management. I told the guard as much and he went to find the contractor to have the vehicle moved. About half an hour later, as I am patrolling, I hear my guard arguing with someone near the building control center. As I approached, I picked up this was an argument about the truck. The contractor was saying that they had been given permission to park there. I walked up and explained that there were only 2 people on site that day that could have given permission. I was one of them and worked with the other for half the day, and we didn't give anyone permission to park there. He needed to move the vehicle. The contractor left at that point and I thought the issue was settled. About 15 minutes later, I was covering a break in the control room when the foreman of the contract company, who is also the owner of the truck, approached and told me that they had been promised parking and are not going to move the truck. I again politely explained to him that he did not have permission and that the truck needed to move as we needed the loading dock space. He then proceeded to yell at me, call me worthless, and explained how he was so much more important than I was, how he made my yearly salary in a month, and most importantly, he was not moving the truck and he would get me fired if I kept harassing him. As I started to respond, he just turned away and walked away as he was too busy to bother with me. I was furious. It is bad enough to be a disrespecting a-hole, but to also threaten my job was too far. I followed after them and asked them really quickly what company they were with, got the company name and left them alone. I went back to the control center and called the company. I explained who I was and that the truck was illegally parked, that the contractor threatened to have me fired for asking him to move the truck, and that he refused to speak with me about the issue as he was worth too much to bother with a lowly security guard. We spoke for a few minutes as she apologized and asked me what I wanted to happen. I just asked that the contractor be spoken with, as that level of disrespect is unacceptable, and lastly the truck had to be moved. Pretty quickly the truck was moved and the night supervisor for the 3-floor build came and apologized. The contractors were friends of his. He had given them permission to park there as they were helping out for the next few weeks on the job. He paid to park the truck himself and it cost over $150 to park just for the night in the closest lot. He didn't come across as actually apologetic at all, more a guy doing damage control for his friends. This is where the revenge gets pro. $150 in parking is petty at best. The next day, I ran into one of the contractors I was on great terms with. We would often talk for a while when we could. He explained that he was the lead for the entire build on the project, which I hadn't realized previously. I thought he was just one of the regular guys. He spoke with the night supervisor and heard about the issue, chewed out the night supervisor for handling the situation so poorly, fired the subcontractors from the job and blacklisted them from ever doing business with them again. The main contractor company was a huge company that is constantly doing work with the property management company, who owns around a third of all the major buildings in that city and similar amounts in most of the other big Canadian cities. Not a company you want a bad reputation with. And guys, if you have watched until here, please don't forget to post some star emojis in the comments if you enjoy my content. Thank you so much in advance. And the next one is titled High on the Hocks, a story of pro-family revenge. So, one of my brothers is adopted and is amazing. He didn't get anything handed to him in life and he is seriously one of the hardest working people I know. Just as he was starting his own family, he had even more financial burden due to some medical problems. Still, somehow he managed to build half a house on some land my dad sold him. He used the equity in that to get a second loan and finish it, and he had to fight the bank for that even. Time goes on and he begins to do really well, so he sells the first house he built at a profit and buys some land, like 175 acres in the Midwest. He lives in a rural area. He likes to hunt and does some farming on the land, but the house that was there when he bought it is not ideal, despite some major improvements and renovation. So he builds a third house and puts the house up for sale. He keeps the land around the house for hunting. This is important later. This is when one of his envious family members asks if he and his wife would consider selling them the house. They can only qualify for something like half of what it is worth, but my brother is a fairly generous guy. He agrees to sell the house to them at a rather hefty discount since they are family. I'm sure he felt some of their pain as well. He'd had his own difficulty back when he was starting out. The bank agrees to loan them the money. They cannot go wrong. It is for way less than the property is worth, and the deal is done. A few short months go by. He is driving by the property and spots a for sale sign. He stops in and the husband explains that there were some things about the house they were not happy with, so they were planning on selling it and buying a house more in town or something. My brother explains that they got a sweet deal only because they were family and that he would appreciate them selling the house back to him for what he sold it to them for. The husband basically closes the door on that and my brother leaves. And he thinks about it. I am 100% certain that the family members understood that they were getting a good deal because they were family, and he was happier selling it to them with the understanding that they were not to take advantage of his good graces. This is a guy, by the way, that manages big projects. He's a really fair guy. The stuff he does in construction probably half of you have driven over, big bridges that go over rivers like the Mississippi for example. He is used to solving hard problems. This one is not that hard. The next day he drives out with some fence in the back of his truck and the family members in the house wake up to some fence posts being driven into the ground. The husband comes out. "What is going on?" he asks. "I'm just putting up some hog fence on my property. Don't worry, it is all on my land. I will just go around your house here and put a gate in so you can get in and out." The husband is a bit perplexed. "You are bringing in pigs?" And my brother was seriously set to do it too. He had about 100 lined up from a farmer down the road. The husband goes back into the house. A few minutes of discussion occur. The next day, they all meet at the bank and the deed is transferred back to my brother, and he did not even have to deploy the hogs. And guys, as we always say, never mess with a farmer, or in this case with someone who is friends with a farmer. And the next one is titled, "You mess with my truck, I mess with your phone." This story happened about 12 years ago. I was working for a company that owned intellectual property rights to some automotive aftermarket tech headquartered in Phoenix, Arizona. In 2002, the owner of the company suggested to his employees the possibility of relocating the whole business to San Diego. The company was very small, only about 5 people in the whole organization, and all of the co-workers knew each other and were more or less friends either with each other or with the CEO. The boss insisted that we all had a vote, and if anyone voted against the move, the company would stay. We all voted unanimously to move to San Diego, and our first couple years we ended up all living in the same apartment complex in Mission Valley. The new office location was intentionally headquartered across the street from the apartment community, which, as you might imagine, was very convenient. In those days I drove a new pickup truck, and since my office was across the street, I did not drive my vehicle much except on weekends or special trips. As a result, the vehicle remained parked for long periods of time in the covered parking area of the garage. One day I went out to my vehicle to find a hefty trash bag dumped in the back of my truck. Naturally, I found it a bit creepy and off-putting. When I hopped onto the bed of the truck to haul it out, I found to my utter disgust that it was dripping wet with juices from rancid meat of some kind, I think probably chicken. At this point I angrily decided that I was going to figure out who did this, even if I have to manually sort through every item of trash in this stinking kitchen bag. I donned some latex gloves and went to work fishing item by item, piecemeal from the rotting trash bag. Eventually I struck pay dirt. I found a utility bill envelope that had been crumbled up. I opened it up and discovered that the culprit was one of my co-workers who fancied himself a bit of a prankster. Said offender, I will call him Cam, lived in the same apartment phase as I did, just a few doors down. First, a little context. Back in those days I was fascinated with lockpicking. I owned, among other things, a lockpick gun, which admittedly requires very little skill to operate. Aside from that, it is convenient because they are quicker than using a rake or individual picks. I also owned some basic phone testing equipment, including a grey bar telco lineman test set, and with some effort I succeeded to locate the telco phone utility closet on my floor and was able to let myself in. I don't remember if I had to use an ANY line to identify Cam's circuit or whether the termination points were labeled, but I did manage to locate the ring and tip for his pair. Then, using the lineman set, I was able to use a certain number to activate the call forwarding feature. This was SBC AT&T in those days. I forwarded all of his calls to the local Jack in the Box restaurant. More context, my co-workers all teased me incessantly because I refused to eat at Jack in the Box because, well, I simply didn't like the food. This would make it subtly obvious at some point that I was the person responsible, since Jack in the Box was a running office joke by this time. After forwarding his line, I cross-connected the ring and tip, which shorted the line out. Status: line was dead and calls were forwarded to Jack in the Box. I let Cam believe that I had hacked his phone service provider switch, yes he was gullible, and let him back for 2 days before undoing the damage. Meanwhile, everyone in the office thought it was the funniest revenge they had ever heard of and agreed the response was appropriate. And indeed, guys, I have to say that was a pretty genius revenge, but for some reason this story reminded me that there's one fast food chain from the United States that I really miss here in Thailand. Unbeknownst to some of you maybe, actually Thailand has a lot of the famous fast food chains in the US. Recently we even got Taco Bell. However, what I am really missing here is White Castle. I know White Castle is maybe not the most popular fast food chain in the US, but for some reason I really love those small, probably reheated in the microwave burgers. But it might also be because Harold and Kumar is one of my favorite movies of all time, who knows. What is your favorite fast food chain? Let us know in the comments. And the last one was posted by user Infinite Emotions on our own subreddit r/ripe stories, and it is titled The Friendly Squatter. This is not my story, it is my great aunt's, as she told it to me about 10 years ago, and it is not exactly a Neighbors from Hell story. Ripe has my permission to use this if he wants to. My great aunt had just gotten married to her husband and moved to Florida. They moved to a relatively rural beach suburb, houses with yards that are about half an acre, less than 20 minutes walk from the beach to the suburb. Most of this neighborhood was nice and well maintained, but there was this one house that had been allowed to go to crap. The pool, and for some reason all the yards had a pool for some reason my great aunt was unable to explain to me, was never maintained, and in Florida that is dangerous because an unmaintained pool is not just a breeding ground for mosquitoes but also attractive to gators, which was something my great aunt learned the hard way when a gator ate her dog. They filed complaints. There were several city laws about allowing your water features to become attractive to wildlife, but they lived in the county and nothing could be done. According to my great aunt, animal control was out once or twice a week to remove the gators from the pool. One day, a man and his 2 children, a young teen girl and a mid-teen boy, moved into the house. The very first he did was put a fence around the pool, preventing gators from setting up in it. According to great aunt, they and the rest of the neighborhood threw a party, making the man the guest of honor. He then began fixing up the rest of the yard and the house they were living in. During this time, the neighbors learned that the man was really hard up for money and they would pay him for his help with their homes and yards as well. My great uncle, a beginning businessman whose concept product was flying off the shelves, tutored the kids with their math, and great aunt helped the girl when the inevitable girl problems arose and they became part of the neighborhood community. Now, one of the things that my great aunt remembered well was that when they first moved in, both kids were skittish. Like wild animals, shy, skittish, and she and great uncle had conversations about whether or not the kids would need a safe place to stay, but they warmed up to the neighborhood, so she had decided that they were just shy. She also said that they were never nervous around their father. One day, great aunt was out in her yard and saw them hastily packing and throwing things into their car. According to her, the man was frantic, wild-eyed, and the kids were pale and frightened. She asked what was going on and he told her that they had to leave, it was an emergency, and they left. After they left, the police came by looking for the man. From the police they learned why the man had fled. He was not, as he had told the neighborhood, renting the property, he had been squatting in it. Number 2, he was not the kids' father, he was their uncle. According to the police, sometime when the kids had been little, he had taken them from their parents and went on the run. Naturally, everyone was stunned. They had no idea, and of course they had no idea where he could have gone. Car officers? He didn't have a car. The whole lot of them had just appeared one day and disappeared another. Maybe they just used buses to get around. That was when my great aunt paused, smiled, and took a drag of her cigarette before saying, "Always be nice to your neighbors. Infinite. Especially if you are on the wrong side of the law but on the right moral ground." As for how the police found them, turned out the neighbor who owned the property, who was never there to maintain it, was letting it go to crap so that he could get a tax break or something. Great aunt wasn't clear about it and was alerted that something was up when an assessor told him that the home, now maintained and no longer falling apart, was worth a lot more money than he had told the tax agency, which was when he would call the police on the squatter. My great uncle, great aunt, and the rest of their neighbors were, rightfully so in my opinion, pissed when they found out. They banded together and bought the home from the neighbor and might have put pressure on him to sell the thing, but I cannot swear to it, and made it into a community guest house that everyone had shares in. And thank you very much for posting this surprisingly positive story, because usually when you see a story about squatters, it is often very negative. Either way, thank you so much for everybody who is posting awesome stories on r/ripe stories. I really enjoy reading these stories because they are often very unique and are different than the usual stories you see on Reddit. And Ripe stars, unfortunately we have already reached the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed the content. However, if you cannot wait for more Ripe content, then I suggest you head on over to patreon.com/ripeyoutube, where you can find more exclusive Reddit content read by me. Patreon subscriptions start at just $1 per month, and for $1 your name will show up at the end of each of my new videos. However, if you are willing to spend $3 per month, you will get access to more than 50 exclusive Reddit videos, mostly just no mother-in-law stories. However, please understand, I don't want to pressure anyone into spending money, because I am already incredibly grateful that you watch my videos every single day. Thank you so much for your daily support, it really means the world to me, and I hope to see you again tomorrow for the next video.